Welcome to the Physician Associate Podcast.
Hello, my name is James. Welcome to this episode of the Physician Associate Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mohammed. Welcome to the show, Mohammed.
Hi, James. Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
I shall do indeed. Yep. So my name is Mohammed Hussain. I'm a physician associate working in general practice, and I'm also the course lead for a physician associate course in Yorkshire, more specifically at the University of Bradford.
Perfect. It's fair to say you were perhaps one of the first physician associates to work and train in the UK?
Early ones, I'd say. I probably wasn't the first. So I was at the fourth cohort out at the institution that I went to. And then, but I was one of the first in Yorkshire, I'd say, if I remember correctly. I think at the time there wasn't that many physician associates working, either in primary care or secondary care in Yorkshire.
Perfect. Okay. Can you start by taking us back to your life before you were a physician associate? How did you end up getting into PA world?
I did my GCSEs, A-levels, and then went on to study applied and human biology at the University of Bradford, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then it came to the second year of my 3-year course, where I started to have a bit more of a serious think, shall I say, about what I wanted to do after I completed my degree. At the time, I was more orientated towards the PGCE in secondary education. So I managed to join one of the societies at the university where they arranged sort of training within secondary school, where you were, in essence, like an assistant in the classroom. So I did that throughout my second year. And then I stumbled upon a physician associate working at the practice at which I was registered with in Birmingham. And I thought this sounded interesting. So I was toying up whether to go around the PGCE route. And then the idea of physician associate really became at the forefront once I looked more into the role. At the time, there were only 4 courses offering the course. That then became 2. So I became a bit concerned as to whether I should go down this route in relation to job prospects. At the time, there was hardly any awareness of the physician associate role. We were often seen as a glorified HCA or a glorified nurse, with no disrespect to any of those professions. And it was really difficult to get people's heads around what the role entailed. It was difficult for us as well as physician associates to actually really articulate what we do, particularly in an area where it was up north and there was no awareness of the role whatsoever. And at the time, the bodies such as Health Education England, NHS England, hadn't really put any emphasis on the role. Although if they were, it was more background, not at the forefront, shall I say. So it was very challenging at the time, having to sort of repeatedly explain who you are when you're on the wards as a student or meeting other HC healthcare profession students as well, to really explain properly what you were, as well as for them to actually have an idea as to what you do. So yeah, it was extremely challenging. I think now things have changed a lot now, as you're well aware, James. There's a lot more of, what do you call it? There's a lot more awareness of the role now. There's a lot more publicity around the role. More organisations taking up physician associates are doing a better job at advocating the role, promoting the role. Health Education England, as you are aware, have ambassadors for the role as well.
Question that might be of interest to GP employers and physician associates who are thinking of going into primary care. What makes a good or attractive job advert, do you think, in primary care to get PAs interested?
So it has to involve a variety. So I always sort of say that GP practices or PCNs, primary care networks, really need to do what we call a needs assessment, really, to see what exactly they would want from a physician associate entering the organisation. As you're aware, there's a lot of overlap now between roles. There's a lot of role diversification in general practice. You've got ANPs, you've got ACPs, you've got pharmacists, you've got physician associates as well. And there's a lot of skill mix overlap, but also skills mix. And, the best thing about us, I always say this, is that we get a mixture of everything within our 2 years, particularly the large amount of placement learning as well, which really, really helps us hone in on those clinical skills that we can offer as an advantage compared to other sort of other professions. Again, no disrespect to any other profession, out there. But in terms of what makes a good job advert, I'd say variety. So, seeing on the day appointments, for example, involving some chronic disease clinics as well, is always a good development for that for the physician associate. I'd say if there's any opportunity to build up an interest or a specialism, we've got physician associates doing fantastic things in primary care now, from minor op clinics to expertise in, gynecology. I'm seeing on LinkedIn nowadays, PA specializing in MSK, putting in injections and things. So if there's any room for specialization as well to a certain extent, but obviously keeping your general aspect, being general practitioners or general practitioners, not GPs, of course, but having a generalist knowledge. So having a variety, having a defined job progression as well, whether they'd be able to have opportunities for leadership as well. Obviously, it might not be at the forefront of a newly qualified PA, but having at least an expectation in terms of how they can work towards that. A lot of people are looking for leadership roles as well at some point in their career. So how they can help with that. Opportunities for teaching and learning. More PAs are entering teaching spheres, whether that's in academia, whether that's being a clinical educator in some way, shape or form. So if there's any opportunity to develop a particular skill set in teaching and learning, being able to lead on a particular disease area, not necessarily specialist here, but whether you could lead on the frailty care register or leading on, for example, a palliative register or something along those lines that builds up some of those clinical aspects and the more complex aspects. Again, probably not what I'd expect for a newly qualified PA to walk into straight away because of the complexity of that particular topic, but something to work towards that. And then a lot of PAs come to me, especially my newly qualified PAs that have left the institution, but still want that slight mentorship support. Stuff around what is the CPD like, CPD opportunities generally, what's the, having an attractive study budget as well. And then obviously salary here is the key thing. To a certain extent, it shouldn't be. And I always advertise it's more about what you learn in your first couple of years as a PA rather than the salary that you should be looking for. But I think there's a lot more parity in terms of salary now compared to what it was when I was a student, particularly in general practice. Many of you are aware that don't work on the agenda for change. There's a lot of internal banding within the organization. But in general, I think there's a lot more parity. But yeah, an attractive salary does help, or competitive salary, does help, as I've established when I was leading on some preceptorship schemes in my previous job. So it'd be a mixture of, good salary, CPD opportunities, study time, study budget, and whether there's any studies, buddy support, tapping into any existing PA network that might be in the organization as well. So, teaching opportunities, for them to be teachers, but also for them to have, attend some teaching as well. That's quite useful, whether that's with the GP registrar or the FY2 rotations that come into general practice as well. Opportunities for learning, not just clinic, opportunities for self-development as well. So I think it's a mixture of all things as well. And I think the key thing one of the key things anyway, that's becoming a key thing, shall I say, if not already, is whether it's a practice contract or a PCN contract. I think the PCN contract, once can be quite a concern if you're having to work across multiple sites, rather than just one or two specific sites. That can be a concern, but also an opportunity, for example, to become potentially the lead PA for that particular PCN as well, potentially as well. So knowing about what the pros and cons are of each would also help from a person who's applying, but also the person who's advertising as well, making it a bit more specific about whether this is for a GP practice specific or whether it's PCN. We've had numerous people leave organizations because they feel like they've been run ragged, actually working across 3 or 4 sites, within one organization. They don't feel like they get that development that they want to as well. And I think supervision can be different within different organizations, even though it's part of the PCN. So that can be quite off-putting as well. So knowing exactly what from your PA also helps as well in terms of having an attractive job offer. I must state that when I was training to be a PA, I think there were 3 things I wanted to achieve, and to the will of God, I've managed to achieve them. So one was whether I'll actually get a job. Second of all, whether I'll actually get a job in Bradford. And third, whether I'd actually become the program leader of Bradford, if Bradford were to ever deliver a PA course. And I'm thankful to say that all three have been accomplished, but that does not mean that, I'm done and that's it. Goodbye, I'm just staying here. Obviously, naturally, you always want to progress, but the particular organisation I worked for was in Airedale, Wharfdale, Craven, known as Holycroft Surgery initially. A huge thanks to them actually for my own development. They took me on and they actually got me involved in a variety of things, actually getting me to do the chronic disease stuff, the minor ailment stuff. They also allowed me to deliver anticoagulation services in the practice as well. And I went on a course in Birmingham for that, and that was unexpected. It wasn't a particular interest of mine initially. When I first qualified, couldn't really get my head around anticoag at the time. There's always, as a student, I'm sure many of your listeners who are students now or recent qualified peers would empathise that, we're not expert of everything when we do our national exam. There are always learning points. And for me, anticoag and cardiology in general was one, as well as obs and gynae at the time. But I think the real unexpected twist came in 2017 when, unfortunately, health was an issue, or becoming an issue at the time, with multiple eye infections, which kept me out of action repeatedly, unfortunately. So 2 weeks off and then a week on and then 2 weeks off again. And I could tell I was hindering the team. Naturally, you kind of feel, right, this is impacting on things. Not that I was involved from a business aspect, but in terms of service delivery, clinics being cancelled, the knock-on effect it has on the admin team, etc., and so on, and the clinical team, of course, so on and so forth. So again, fortuitously, around about 2016, Bradford University then started offering their PA course at the time. And I think a year later, they then approached me to say, they didn't approach me, job came out. And I think Holycroft were being kind to say, look, an opportunity to come to enter academia. It could be better for yourself long term. God forbid your health deteriorates. At least you'll have a foot in academia as well. And you'll always be, welcome here, of course. And it was going to be a part-time, not a, goodbye, Mohammed. I still wanted to maintain my clinical aspect to my role, and they were wanting to support that as well. And originally the offer was just a day a week. And then I went to the interview. Thankfully, I got the job. And then they said, well, actually, there's another role that's more of a 2.5 day a week, actually. And it was a module leader role. And I was just wondering whether they're wondering whether I wanted to accept it. So I spoke to family, I spoke to the practice, and I think it came at a good time because I think 2 years, 2 full-on years, or 2.5 years, full of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or 9 to 6 actually, it was becoming quite intense. And at that point, I was doing 15-minute clinics, and it was just getting a bit full on. And had my health been a bit more robust, I think it was a bit more manageable. But I think I came to the decision that actually, I think I probably want to step down, not entirely, of course, but have a foot in academia to see what opportunities that might bring. And so, I then went down to 2 days a week clinical and 2.5 days a week at academia. And then academia itself has brought a lot of opportunities for self-development. June 2020, I then was promoted from the module lead to the program lead. And so that's been a fantastic opportunity for me to have a real emphasis on curriculum, design and delivery, strategic direction of the actual course, as well as the profession to a certain extent, because I've been able to work with organizations within the area in terms of, boosting, PA job specs and linking in with a lot of organizations for placements to really help facilitate the role, or facilitate employment of the role, shall I say. We are also part of the PA Schools Council, and I know you've had the chair of the council in one of your episodes, Jeannie Watkins, who I'm eternally grateful for, as she was one of my tutors at George's as well. So I've been able to sort of, represent the university at the PA Schools Council, as well as work with Health Education England on a number of things as well, independently, as well as through the institution as well, and being involved in the whole EDI aspect of sort of curriculum redesign at the Bradford University. But if you're in academia, I'm sure your listeners may empathize with me that it's never a part-time job. It's never ending. It's always been like on call, particularly the program lead role. If anything untoward happens with your students and or staff, then you kind of have that urge to facilitate, even though it might be on a Sunday night, you lecture at 9 a.m. of the next day, might not be able to deliver. And it's a bit of a firefighting issue, but it has its challenges, but it has its enjoyments and pleasures as well. So that's been a bit of a large unexpected turn. I never really expected that to happen, actually. But again, thankfully it has. Yep. And Another unexpected term, which I've not really mentioned at the moment, is my continuity with the post-education subcommittee that exists as well within the FPA, which many of your PA listeners will be aware of. So that role involves organising the annual general conference, as well as looking at authorising CPD opportunities as well for people wanting to do CPD events for PAs as well. And very early on in the days, assisting with the design of some of the content around employing for GPs, employing for PAs as well. So that's been quite useful as well. I won't say an unexpected turn, but it's been something that I've really enjoyed being a part of, actually, or pass on that experience as a physician associate through that committee.
Do you have any advice for physician associates or even PA students who are thinking of wanting to follow in similar footsteps that you've taken and wanting to get into PA education eventually and teaching and leading the profession?
I think knowing where the profession is heading, so reading a lot of the guiding documents around what the NHS agenda is around physician associates, employment numbers where PAs are working, how the profession has developed over the years is also quite helpful. There's a lot more emphasis on health inequality, so understanding how PAs can help around that as well as equality, diversity, inclusion, or what we call it here, I'm sure many people call it as well, cultural competence. So not knowing just about EDI, but also the impact of health on other areas of populations, and being culturally aware of how medicine is heading nowadays as well. Being aware of ethics and legalities as well. As PAs, we are faced with a lot of ethical dilemmas at times, or legal dilemmas. And so being aware of how you manage those, and really honing in on your interpersonal skills, such as communication, teamwork, organization, prioritization, developing resilience as well. And so you will have to have your coping mechanisms when things get too much. At times they do. And making sure you've got a plan in terms of how you're going to balance your time commitments, as well as your commitments to your personal lives, your friends, your social family, if you are working as well, any family commitments, you might have caring commitments as well. Just trying to have a plan in mind in terms of how you're going to achieve that as well. I'd say that would be my advice, really.
What about doing qualifications such as postgraduate certificates in education in order to teach and things like that? And even I'm thinking things like MBAs in business and that kind of stuff. Do you think those are options for PAs to consider and for career development? Are they necessary?
I guess it depends on the individual and where their interests lie, what they envisage as what their career plan lies. And the lovely thing about the physician associate profession at this moment in time, that you can determine your own career progression. There isn't this rigid structure at this moment in time. Obviously, we'll have to see what happens after GMC regulation comes into force. But at this moment in time, you can, in essence, define how you want to further your career. So whether that's down the business route and doing an MBA, as you mentioned, many PAs, are now partners in their PCNs or their practices, and that's fantastic to them. Other physician associates like the teaching route, so doing a PGCE in clinical education. PG Cert in clinical education, or a MEd in clinical education as well. Sometimes it's not necessary because the employing organization, if you're in academia, can actually do that for you. We are now seeing innovative preceptorship schemes in Yorkshire that have a PG Cert in clinical ed embedded in their 2-year preceptorship program. So that's very novel, and that's designed to help the clinical and educational aspect of the physician associate as well. Other courses are, as I've alluded to already, in terms of if you want to do a postgraduate diploma in a particular disease area or a postgraduate certificate in a disease area, that might be of interest as well for those that want to specialize that way. And there are some PAs, obviously, as many may be aware already, that actually do postgraduate entry into medicine. And if that's what floats your boat, then fine, go ahead and do that. But I think there's a lot more within the physician associate profession at the moment, that where it's heading, there will be a lot more opportunities, really.
Brilliant. Thank you for explaining all of that, Mohammed. And I definitely agree with what you've been saying. I wonder if you could give us a little bit more insight as to what it's truly like working in academia and as a PA educator, just so people can go in with their eyes wide open about what the realities of being a PA course lead and working in that space actually involves.
Yeah, sure. So academia is a really interesting environment to work in as a physician associate. I think we have an ability to really drive the physician associate agenda through academia by building the next generation of physician associates, helping them shape their own development and helping them to go on and do wonderful things post-qualification. The actual job itself isn't always what it seems on a job advert, and I'm going to be quite open and frank here. It's not always teaching. I think a lot of it is down to how many days you work within a particular academic institution, but there are multiple opportunities if you are working in academia, and they are wide encompassing. I could probably do a complete podcast on its own here, James, but just to keep it brief, obviously there's teaching, and there's a variety of teaching styles as well that you can do, whether it's role playing, whether it's seminar, case-based discussion, PBL. At Bradford, we do something called TBL, which I won't elaborate on the details here, but it's a slight different manner of delivering a curriculum where a lot of work is being given in advance and then you work in groups, etc. So there's teaching in essence. There's also assisting with assessments as well. So there's creation of assessment, and that could be OSCEs, that could be MCQs, that could be reflective essays. And then there's moderation of assessments. There's marking of assessments as well. There's also quality assurance of assessments. So making sure that they are up to scratch. Linked in with that is being an external examiner. That isn't obviously with the institution that you are working for as an academic, but it is another form of being involved in academia by looking at work externally, being almost like an expert in the subject area. And you don't always need academic experience to be an external. It does help, but you don't always need one. But you'd have to check with individual institutions about that. And that's just the sort of teaching and assessment. Along with that, you could develop your leadership abilities as well. So being a module lead, where you oversee the timetabling, the staffing, and the assessments of a particular module. You could do that on a level higher up, which is a program. And that's what I'm doing currently. So I work with all my module leaders to ensure that their modules are fine from a delivery point of view, their timetabling is fine, their staffing is fine, their assessments are meeting the deadline, and also working with the module leaders and the tutors as well, to be fair, on curriculum enhancement as well for the next academic year. And then that itself is a job in itself. Looking at the curriculum at the moment, I'm sure many of your listeners are aware, the GMC has released, along with the FPA, a new curriculum framework for physician associates, and we have had to fill in what we call a self-assessment questionnaire. All universities have had to fill this in. So that's been a really good mapping exercise to see what we are doing and where there are gaps. And so that is another way in which you can get involved in academia as well, or what you end up doing if you're in academia. And then working with external stakeholders, and that could be the courses within the faculty or within the school that the course is already in, or external stakeholders, for example, placement team or Health Education England, for example, or the HEIs, like I've mentioned, to the PA Schools Council, and employers potentially who may be looking to take on physician associates. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And I've only just touched the surface here. You could actually, go more in and look at, being a head of school, for example, or being a dean, if that's what you want to do, or being something called the director of studies, where you look at the teaching and delivery of curricula across multiple courses, or teach on other courses as well, if it's not just a PA course that you want to teach as well. So there's a whole host of other opportunities that as PAs you can get involved in because of the skills that we have. Thanks,
Mohammed. It sounds like you're very busy in that role.
It's extremely challenging, but I do enjoy it. I must admit, I do enjoy it.
That really comes across, and I can tell how passionate you are about it. What do you think the future holds for you as a physician associate, and the profession as a whole? How do you see things expanding?
So I think the key thing here is regulation. I think once regulation comes into place, I think there's going to be a phenomenal increase, if there isn't already, in PA employment. And then obviously the prescribing agenda will become then the forefront in terms of the next big development for physician associates for the profession. So I think where I see myself heading is I don't want to completely give away clinical responsibilities altogether. I think COVID has opened opportunities for remote working, which have been quite helpful with the practice I'm currently at. So I think continuing my role as an educator in academia is one thing, which I still hope to continue, as well as working in general practice. I don't see myself leaving general practice. I think the role enhancement and role in terms of career development lies in general practice. compared to secondary care. I do say that with an open bias, of course, I would do, but I think there's more room for development in primary care than there is in secondary care as well. So I think once regulation comes in, it'll open a whole new level of horizons for physician associates. So I think I will probably continue as I am. I always get to a crossroads every summer about whether it's still manageable, because academia has its challenges. Increased student numbers equals increased placement numbers, which causes increased workload to a certain extent. So personally, it might be in a couple of years' time where I think actually I need to put all my eggs into one basket, but I'm not willing to do that at the moment because of the opportunities that clinical route does bring. But I think for PAs entering the profession, they'll be entering it at a good time. And I think for qualified PAs or experienced PAs, again, I think the opportunities are endless as well, in terms of where their careers could potentially head should they wish to continue working and practicing as a PA.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it's really important that PAs remain and retain their clinical practice. And I love education and I love teaching PA students, but I also know it's really important to be able to do that from a base of being a clinician, and the two go hand in hand, because teaching keeps my clinical knowledge up to date and students ask me good questions that mean I have to learn things, and then I'm able to pass that back on to students as well. I think it works really well to have both, doesn't it?
I couldn't agree with you more, James.
Mohammed, thank you so much for giving up the time to come on the podcast today and explain to us the role as a PA educator in your career so far. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, James. Really enjoyed it. And I hope your listeners do find some value in what I've said. Equally, it's fine if they haven't. But no, thank you very much, James. It's been an honor to be part of your podcast. And I wish you the best in your further future episodes as well.
Bless you. Thank you. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, if they've heard any points that we've made on the podcast today and they've got questions about what we've spoken about, what's the best way for them to reach out and find you?
Email. Email will be fine.
Perfect. I can leave your contact details in the show notes so people can find you and find out how to get in touch with you on the show notes on their device.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening as well. I hope that was an interesting episode for you to find out a bit more about PA education and how you might go into different careers and different pathways. If you've got an idea for a future episode of the Physician Associate Podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out on social media. I'm at PA Podcast UK, and I hope you'll join me again for the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Physician Associate Podcast.